Hello, and welcome to the Sparta Group podcast. We aim to provide you with up-to-date interviews and debate with opinion leaders in the health, well-being, rehabilitation and mental health space, from our studio or from conferences.
Hello. Have you ever felt fearful and insecure, lacking in confidence and energy, out of your depth, or felt that you were failing to maximize your potential, or felt overworked or overwhelmed? My name is Steve Bennett from Sparta, and I'm delighted that today we'll be covering these and other topics with Dr. Sandi Mann, Senior Psychology Lecturer at the University of Central Lancashire, where she's an expert workplace consultant. She's the author of several books on psychology and human potential, and she runs her own private clinic. She's also the clinical psychology lead for Sparta Health. Good morning, Sandi.
Hello there, Steve. How are you doing today?
Yeah, not too bad, thank you. Just getting used to this podcasting, which is a new territory for me.
It's a whole new world, isn't it?
It certainly is. It certainly is. We've got lots of questions prepared for you, Sandi. They're very spontaneous questions rather than prepared. So it's more subject headings than specific questions. There's something that I'd like to start with is something that has worked well for me in the past. It's something that I call the perception cycle. The perception cycle is essentially, it starts off with your perceptions about a person or a set of circumstances or some incident. And those perceptions lead to some thoughts that we might have about those circumstances or about that person. And then the thoughts lead into the feelings and the emotions that we might have about that person and about those thoughts. And the feelings and the emotions lead to the views that we take about that set of circumstances. The views lead around the circle to the actions that we might take, and the actions that we might take create the results that we get. Now, what I do, if I find that a set of circumstances are not to my satisfaction, I'll change the perception, and it changes all the other links in the chain and changes the results so that they become more satisfactory. Now, having explained all of that, what I'm curious to find is whether that process has any basis in professional psychology, because to me, it seems so relevant to a lot of the subject matter that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, so what you're talking about is what we'd probably in the trade call cognitive behavioural model of emotion or action emotion fusion, if you like. So you're talking about how we feel and how we act and how our perceptions all intermingle with that. And it's really true that in order for us to feel something and to really experience an emotion, whether that be stress or distress or even a positive emotion, we have to interpret that. There has to be some cognitive brain work going on so that we interpret that. All our senses perceive stuff. So we get the perception, things come into our eyes and our ears, we see, we hear things, but we can't feel them unless there's that cognitive interpretation in our head, which is what you're talking about. And that cognitive interpretation is made up of our attitudes, our memories, our view, what you call views, how we've been brought up, previous experiences, and all of these interact so that this is why you can have the same event that's perceived as really stressful, too much, can't cope by one person, but fine by the other person. I mean, take COVID and lockdown. Some people coped with it really well. Some people really struggled. What's the difference? And the difference is in the interpretation, what's going on in your head, that cognitive interpretation. And that's exactly what you're saying, that we can all have the same perceptions, but it's how we interpret those that's really key here. And if we're interpreting them in a very negative way or catastrophic way, or, we have these mind errors where we think terrible things are going to happen and we can't see anything different, we can change the way we think. We can try and capture those thinking styles that we've got used to over time and say, well, actually, what I'm doing here is, I'm catastrophizing, or I'm fortune telling. I'm saying I think I know what's going to happen when really we don't, or I'm assuming the worst is going to happen. And we can catch those thinking errors and change them and say, well, actually, what's the evidence for that? Maybe that won't happen. And if we change the way we think, then we're changing that interpretation. So the things that coming into our senses are the same, but our interpretation's changing. So we feel differently, that changes our emotion, and that in turn will change our actions and our activities. So they're all very much linked, which I think your perception circle that you're talking about.
That's excellent.
Does that make sense?
It does, absolutely, yeah. I mean, the thing that fascinates me is, like, for example, when you've got a set of circumstances with another person who sees things in a completely different way to you, but you've got your own view on things, and you can't reconcile what they're saying with what you're saying. And when you try and what I've tried to do in the past is to try to show empathy, I think, by placing myself in that person's position as best as I can and trying to see things how they see it. And quite often I do end up changing my view because I can see it their way rather than just seeing it the way I saw it before. And sometimes it's a blend of the two ideas or a blend of the two thought processes that create a happier outcome. But it's all about, for me, I mean, I've used the perception cycle many, many times. As you know, I did a research project for a book that I wrote, and it was all about that. It wasn't with no professional qualifications like yours, but it was all about really trying to understand how our brain works and how our thoughts work. That leads me nicely on to the thought processes. I'm fascinated by how changing our thoughts takes that one section out of the perception cycle. Changing our thoughts can change our outcomes. How consciously we're able to do that, if we are able to do it. Is there any guidance you can give there about changing thought processes?
Yeah, it's really hard, but like you say, when you've got a cycle, you want to change one bit of it so you can break the cycle. So if you're in a cycle that you don't like or you're not happy with, or it's not comfortable, it's causing you stress or distress, you've got to try and break the cycle at some point. And one of the hardest places to break is the feeling. You can't help the way you feel. We always say this, we can't help the way we feel, but we can influence that by changing the way we think, because that will change the way we feel. So it is all about controlling the thoughts. And this is the basis of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is a really good therapeutic way of helping people, not just with mental health problems, but all people. Everyone can benefit from CBT. We tend to use it in the mental health arena. So I'm a CBT practitioner, but we can use it for anything, not just for people with mental health problems. I often do. I'm often trying to challenge my thoughts. And this is what I think you're saying, Steve. It's about how do we do that? The first thing to do is capture your thoughts. Thought catching, when you are getting into a cycle of what we call maladaptive thinking styles or unhelpful thinking styles.
Yep.
So these are when we immediately catastrophize. When we do black and white thinking, it's either or, it's either this or that. Shoulding, musting, those are unhelpful thinking styles. They're maladaptive. Oh, I should have done this, I should have done that. Imagining that you know what other people are thinking, we call that mind reading. Oh, they're going to think I'm a right idiot. They're going to think I'm not up to the job. You know, you don't know. You're trying to mind read. All these are thinking errors, maladaptive thinking styles that don't help us, that lock us into this cycle of thoughts, emotions, negative emotions, which can lead to behavior. We might withdraw, we might engage in self-sabotage. So we won't put so much effort into something at work because, oh, I know it's only going to be rejected, or I know it's going to be rubbish, so we won't put the effort in. So there's that link between, you know, thoughts, emotions, and action, behavior. So trying to break that, the easiest way, even though it's not that easy, but the easiest way is with the thoughts. So first of all, capture those thoughts. Second step is to challenge those thoughts. So am I engaged in an unhelpful thinking style, a maladaptive thinking style? And if I am, what's the way that I can challenge this? And the best way that I always use is kind of like imagining a court case. So you've got a court case. So once, take for example, a maladaptive thought that I'm a failure. A lot of people have that. I'm rubbish. I'm a failure. I shouldn't be doing this job. So it's like having a court case. So you've got, on the one hand, you've got the evidence that you're a failure. And on the other hand, you've got the evidence that you're not and that you're successful. I don't know whether you're a failure or not, but look at the evidence. Try and look at it objectively. What have you done that's succeeded? What have you done that's failed? And weigh it up. Imagine you're in court and the prosecution is saying, yes, you're a failure. And the defense saying, no, you're not. Who would win? Where's the evidence? The chances are that you probably have more stuff in the defence, more stuff that is evidence for you not being a failure, or for these negative thought patterns for not being accurate. So try and look at it objectively. And that's what we mean by thought challenging. So it's a whole pattern, a whole way of thinking, a whole way of challenging our thoughts.
Is there any merit when a negative thought or a negative thought pattern enters your mind? And if you're struggling with it, is there any merit in actually changing the subject, taking your mind off it and thinking about something else for a time, and then coming back to it, revisiting it later? Because I frequently do that. When I find that my thinking processes can't focus positively on something that I know requires positive thinking, I'll stop thinking about it. I'll start thinking about something else and then come back to it later with a fresh mindset. Is there any merit to that, do you think?
So you're asking kind of about, there's two things I think you're asking about. One is distraction. The other is a kind of creative process of mind wandering, I think. And they're both slightly different but related. So I'm a massive fan of what you're saying, which is coming back to it later, thinking about something else. I'm a massive fan of that. But for me, it's not distraction so much. Distraction is a good strategy, but distraction is very much about not thinking about something. It's deliberately not thinking about something. And sometimes it can be helpful, sometimes it can be unhelpful, because distraction isn't actually tackling a particular problem. It's a bit of an avoidance strategy.
Yes, yeah.
And sometimes if somebody has a phobia, for example, or they're afraid of something, they might distract themselves to try and cope. But really, it's a bit of a safety behavior. It's not really helping them with the actual situation. It's stopping them thinking about it. In therapy, we actually want you to be able to cope by thinking about a situation, not distracting yourself. So, if you've got a bit of a social anxiety, and you go into a party or a room full of people, not that we do that anymore, remember those days, a Zoom full of people, how about that, a Zoom full of people, and you're going in and you're a bit nervous, you can use distraction to try and think about something else. I'll look at my phone, I'll do something else, which is okay, but it's not tackling the problem. So you'll still have that problem the next time you go into that Zoom or that room. So a better way is to help you cope and focus and not distract yourself. But then we come on to this other strategy that you're talking about, which is really this mind-wandering, daydreaming, creative process, which is really very different. And I'm a massive believer in that. One of my specialist research areas is boredom. I've written a book on all about the benefits of boredom. And for me, the key to that sort of downtime is allowing your mind to wander and the creative juices to flow. I've done the research which shows that when we let our minds wander and daydream, our creativity will increase. So if you have a problem, if you're worried about something, you're anxious about something, letting your mind wander, going for a walk, for example, just letting your mind wander and be free and creative, not using distraction because you're allowing your thoughts to go wherever they want to. You're not trying to force them in a particular direction, but it allows you to see things differently. When we daydream, we're less consciously inhibiting our thought processes. So when we're consciously thinking, we'll think to ourselves, oh no, I can't do that. That's crazy. No, that won't work. But when we're daydreaming, anything's possible. And that's why it's quite delightful, because you go into all these fantasies in daydream that you're not inhibiting your actual creative processes. And, you can come up with all sorts of ideas when you daydream, problem solving, all sorts of solutions. And yeah, a lot of them might be ridiculous, but some of them, you only need one sometimes, could be the solution. So in answer to your question, they're both good strategies, but for different times. And that's really the key, that it's not about one size fits all. It's about different things working for different people at different times. And, it's horses for courses, they say, don't they?
I think what you just said is fascinating about boredom being the seed of creativity. How your brain operates to achieve that, I think, is amazing. You'd love to be able to see inside a brain to see how that is arriving at that. I mean, I've read things about how some of the great inventions of life were created and occurred as a result of the inventor. People, like Thomas Edison and Henry Ford and this sort of person, their creativity came mainly when they were mentally inactive and they allowed the brain to go quiet. And I think, how can that happen? How can you almost imagine your brain to be empty of thought at the time? So where is this inspiration coming from?
That's what people commonly think, that your brain is blank. And people sometimes say, my mind's gone blank. This often happens in some therapeutic processes where people, I can't think of anything, mind's blank. Our minds are never blank. Our minds are never inactive. We have these incredible computers in our minds and they're always active. They're always busy. So what we need, so I'm going to try and give you a little tour into the bored brain.
Oh, please.
So, when we're bored, imagine these neurons in our brain firing away. And everybody has an optimal level of stimulation that's right for them. So everyone's is going to be different. Some people need more, some people need less. So when our brains are constantly active, constantly working, they're always trying to get their optimal level of stimulation. That's what our brains do. So they're firing away, trying to get that optimal level of stimulation. If you have too much for your comfort level, you feel overwhelmed and you feel it's too much, can't cope, and you feel stressed and anxious. And there's a need to dampen it down. And people will say, well, I just need to go for a walk, or I just need a bit of downtime, because you need to dampen that down. But the opposite is true. When there's too little stimulation, that's when we feel bored, because our brains are trying to take us up to that level. And they're firing neurons away, trying to get us to that level of stimulation. And if you're searching for neural stimulation in your brain and you can't find it, that frustrated feeling of not being able to find it is what we label as boredom. But what's really clever is our brains will find its own solution to boredom if we allow it to. What tends to happen nowadays is that as soon as we're bored, we go, I'm bored, I'll get my phone out and I'll swipe and scroll the boredom away. But we're not allowing our own brain to unbore ourselves. But if we did, and if you forced it to find its own boredom reducing strategies, your brain will find neurons and find its own creative path, and it will mind wander and daydream, and you'll make up stories and you'll think of things. And that's your brain firing neurons and reaching the optimal level of stimulation. And if we allow that to happen, it's incredible to think what could happen within ourselves. I mean, I often think, like you said about inventors, but I often think, think about things like bread. Bread is such a basic staple. We don't even think about it. But how did that come about? Who thought originally of mixing yeast and flour and water and letting it rise and grow? Where on earth did that come from? And I kind of like to imagine that our ancestors were kind of sitting in a field and contemplating the horizon and bored out of their heads and playing around with bits of wheat and whatever, and just thought, I wonder what will happen if we mix this and mix that and a bit of water. And they probably found beer first, actually. That was probably the first process.
The fascinating thing then is they're looking to taste something.
Yeah. What would happen? What will this taste like? What will happen if I do this? What will happen if I mix that? And that's really the creative process that we can do literally, or in our heads or in our brains. And that's why we need boredom. And my whole thesis about boredom, my book is called The Upside of Downtime, Why Boredom is Good, because we need that boredom in our lives to stimulate those creative juices. That kind of lateral thinking stuff, Edward de Bono. Yeah. So it's that idea that when your mind is a bit freer from our conscious, you've got it on your bookshelf. Wow.
Books up there, yeah.
Wow, that is really impressive. I handed you that, didn't I? We've not even rehearsed that.
Yeah, I got two of his books up there. So.
I'll have to study a bookcase and come up with other things. But so the idea is that when we can free our conscious constraints in our brain, we can do that lateral thinking and jump from topic to topic and come up with solutions that might seem crazy. It's be like brainstorming. They might seem crazy at the time, but you only need one great idea, and that can lead to a lot of stuff.
Well, what you've explained there is really fascinating, and I think it brings this section to a close, really, because it almost goes back to the beginning, because what you've just said about the brain when it's in a state of boredom becoming creative, if you go back to the perception cycle again at the beginning, that's how we can change our perceptions, by stepping away from the circumstances and thinking differently. And you've spelt it out more professionally than I have, and I'm just speaking from a layman's terms.
No, I love it, Steve, yeah.
But it's absolutely, what you're telling me tells me that the perception cycle does have a basis that works based around the thought processes that we have. But I think what we'll do, we'll bring this section to a close. Thanks so much, Sandi. That first session's been absolutely so insightful and really useful.
Can we do this again tomorrow, Steve?
Absolutely, yeah. Well, the next section I think we're going to talk about is the fascinating subjects of feelings and emotions and beliefs and values. So I think what we need to do is just pull away from this one now and then come back in and start the next session.
At Sparta Group, we are keen to hear your thoughts about the topics discussed today. So please tweet us at Sparta_health or visit our website for more information and support.